before turning to the main event, which is the Lifetime Achievement Award, I just want to note the particular significance of being here today in Harbour House. 52 years ago, Jean, you were one of the founders. And it was you and Styan and a bunch of others, of course, who were involved, but you would have been the key movers. You would then be the first director of the ECPR, so you were a predecessor to Tanya, who is our current director. And if you just look at the legacy that you've left us, over 300 institutional members, 300 to 350 institutional members from 50 countries, 5 journals, 2 book series, and a blog series. We run an annual general conference, the joint sessions, 2 method schools, a house series of events. We have more than, we have 57 standing groups and research networks. And we have, how many staff nowadays? 32 staff somehow squeezed into this building. For that alone, you deserve special recognition. And of course, we already provided that by naming our PhD prize after you some while ago. And of course, involving you in our 50th year celebrations a few years ago. But today, obviously, the focus is on the Lifetime Achievement Award, which is presented on a biennial basis to a scholar who has made an outstanding contribution to European political science. It was launched in 2005, and the 8 previous prize winners are Giovanni Sartori, Philipp Schmitter, Gerhard Lembruck, Hans-Dieter Klingemann, Ian Budge, of course, Rod Rhodes, Johnny Lewandowski, and most recently, of course, David Miller. The jury for this year's award were myself as ECPR chair, Chris the Shower, who was the former chair of the ECPR, Veronica Angel, who was the winner of the ECPR Rising Star Award in 2020, Sylvia Kritzinger from the University of Vienna, who is an official representative there for the ECPR, and of course Tanya Monroe, the ECPR director. And on this occasion, as you'll know, we decided to make a joint award to Jean and to Beate Kohler. The ECPR Lifetime Achievement Award in 2022 is being given to Professor Jean Blondel in recognition of a long and prestigious record of academic leadership and intellectual engagement. Currently based at the University of Siena, his academic career has included positions at the universities of Kiel, Essex, and the European University Institute, where he still holds a professorial fellowship at its Schumann Centre. Professor Blondel's long-held passion for the study of comparative politics is peppered throughout his many publications. Indeed, he was one of the pioneers in insisting that comparative research should move beyond regional boundaries. His research has been centred mostly on the comparative study of leaders, leadership and democratic institutions. This included an early interest in legislatures before a shift in focus to cabinets in parliamentary systems, and most recently to the study of presidents and presidentialism on the continent of Africa. His publication profile stretches back so far that a complete list is unavailable, but it numbers at least 29 books. And so just to give you a sense, if we select one per decade, just one per decade, these include Voters, Parties and Leaders in 1963, Comparative Legislatures in 1973, Cabinets in Western Europe in 1988, People and Parliament in the European Union in 1998, Political Culture in Asia and Europe in 2006, and the Presidential Republic in 2015. Professor Blondel's career has included key foundational roles, most notably as one of the founders of the European Consortium for Political Research over 50 years ago. He was the ECPR's first director, and in the 1960s of the Department of Government at the University of Essex as its first head of department, which remains one of the world's leading centres of political science to this day. In 2004, he was awarded the Johann Skytte Prize for Lifetime Achievement in Political Science. In 2000, he was also awarded a Lifetime Achievement Award from the British Political Studies Association. He's been elected as member of the American Academy of Sciences and the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, and he's been awarded honorary doctorates from a number of universities and has held a large number of visiting positions at a number of other universities. So Jean, as chair of the ECPR, it is my pleasure to award you the 2022 Lifetime Achievement Award.
Thank you very, very much. You move me. I don't think I deserve all this. I mean, I've written a PhD and a number of other bits of stuff stuff which are probably worth reading in some capacity or other. But I would like, above all, that is why I often turn to Ian when I think about this, I would like something to be done which would be permanently inscribed into plaster, I don't know, or cement. If we can succeed as a result of this meeting or any meeting which would be consequential upon this one, we say something about writing a PhD on the subject of completed political science work and of their consequences, I would be very, very happy. But at the same time, I don't think it's not quite enough to turn to me for what I have done in the subject. Whereas there are many, I'm sure, to begin with our friend from Lille here, and many others. There are many people who work on PhDs across the world. In fact, the distinction between the United States and Western Europe from the point of view of perception of what a PhD could be or should be in the subject is worth examining more systematically than it's been done. But I'm not only wanting to quote Louis on this. I really would like, if it were possible, to obtain on the part of the people who are here today, except from myself, that they would agree to try to see to it that in the course of the next academic year, efforts be made that at a minimum one, and no particular maximum, but certainly 2 or 3, if possible, be produced from the work of a lot of people in that field. I know that, judging from Ian, a lot of people have worked on PhDs on the subject, and have not, Ian has done it recently, I've not done it before that, perhaps. And I would have thought it's not just perhaps. I'm sure that there has been work on PhDs in Western Europe and elsewhere in the world, which would be worth doing and publishing. And I would hope that this body be prepared to take some offensive action, as it were, to try to ensure that this PhD be published. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. Thank you. It was Maurizio and Ferdinand, who couldn't be here today, who nominated you for the prize. So Maurizio.
Yes, thank you. Of course, it would have been nice that Ferdinand was here, but he's not well for COVID again, and because really Ferdinand was the first who had the idea to nominate Jean, and when he proposed to me the idea, immediately accepted the idea. But since he's not here, we'll say some words, not so formal, because most of the important things have been said already in the Laudatio. So I will perhaps add something from what I've experienced over the years by meeting, working with Jean in many ways in many different places. Now, first of all, places. I think one important thing that I would mention is something about geography, the geography of Jean. The geography of Jean is truly the geography of a comparatist. He was never happy to be simply in one country. Of course, he first of all was not happy to stay in France anymore, so he left France and decided to really develop comparative political science. He had to go elsewhere, so he went to Britain. And of course there his career, everybody knows well, what developed, and the role he had also in developing and constructing institutions there is well known, so I will not have to repeat this. But of course also partly also because of the intervention of Margaret Thatcher. I think he was not to remain only in Britain. Well, of course, there were some important trips to the United States, and I think that was, although he did not stay for long years in the United States, but he was there many times in different institutions, Yale, Colorado College, Russell Sage Foundation, and whatever. I think this part of his mental geography was also important, because that brought him to think that European political science had to rise to the levels of what was American political science. So this was a comparison between the levels of the discipline. But of course, that was not enough. And then, I think because of Margaret Thatcher and her pension scheme or something like that, I'm not totally familiar with this, he left Essex and he came to the European University Institution, which was at the same time Italy. And of course, that plunged him into all the interesting things of Italian academic and political life, and learning the strange things and trying to teach Italians how to correct their academic and political life with some success, but not entire success. But at the same time, the European Union Institute was introducing, and was developing, not introducing because that was already in the mind of Jean, another element of geography, so the European geography, that political science, but of course that had also developed with the ECPR. But that the European University Institute was really strengthening this idea that political science was truly European and not just. But of course there are other elements of the geography of Jean. Of course, I had not mentioned Brazil as the starting point of his research. Of course, Jean was never, he's ambitious. He's not happy only with one continent. So Asia, trying to build in Asia what he had contributed to build in Europe, a sort of Asian European consortium. So his geographical ambitions are broad. And I think one of the lessons that I've learned talking with him is that we tend to think that comparative politics is about European countries, or maybe the United States. But the United States is always something separate. They are so unique that we don't bring them together with other countries. But comparative politics is not just about these so-called developed countries. Whether we are developed or not is another point. But it has to involve possibly every part of the world. Okay, so the geography of Jean is one of the things that struck me from first, that he was broadening his horizon always. And of course I was struck also by, this interesting combination, which is not so common, between the scholarly abilities, scholarly merits, and his organizational interest. He was always keen on one side to develop empirical research, but also to strengthen institutions where he was to some extent involved. So an institution builder, not just a scholar. Now, very often there are institution builders that are not significant scholars, and significant scholars that do not understand anything about how institutions should work and sort of live in their ivory tower. But he was both, and so in this sense I think he's been unique. And so, of course, I will not mention the books, the articles. It's been for me personally, and of course each of us has a personal experience with Jean, being involved in his studies on executives. From the beginning of his comparative works on executive, he involved a number of younger scholars. I had the opportunity and to be one of them, to be involved in learning how to do comparative research, how to also to master research groups, which are made sometimes of prima donna that do not want to be led into a common work and to be sort of guided into a common work. But of course, Jean was always had a very strong hand in leading us to do what he wanted to do. So learning from him how to develop cooperative research effort was, I think, an important part of his teaching how to do this. And of course, I must also mention, also in his speech, he mentioned his sort of interest, or even I would say obsession with PhD programs. That PhD programs, European PhD programs, of course, by now they are more or less taken for granted. We have the well-developed PhD program, but from the beginning it was not so, and particularly in many European countries. And so his effort wherever he went to push for stronger, more structured, better organized PhD programs. Of course, I was struck also by his willingness to build strong friendship. Now, friendship is a big word. We have many friends also in academic life, but sometimes it's really not much more than the word. People we cooperate with, we discuss, we exchange mails, etc., projects, but with Jean, not many of us, but with Jean there's a possibility of building a really strong human friendship that involves a lot of interchange and a lot of empathies. And of course he has also not just friends, he has also enemies. I mean, Jean does not like everybody, and particularly he does not like those who do not think that political science is the most important thing in life. If you think that, well, maybe there is political science, but maybe there is also art, there is also other things that one should devote some into, or gardening or something else. But now one should be very careful to say this. Political science is the thing. In a sense, Jean is a monk of political science. Everything else is irrelevant. Well, of course, not his wife, but so that's important. So, but friendship, when you're able to develop a friendship with Jean, I think this is one of the most humanly rewarding thing, because of course he will criticize you. I mean, friendship is not always easy, and there will be strong discussion and sometimes disagreements, but behind that there is the idea that friendship is about, in a sense, pushing the other to do more, to grow. Friendship is not something static. True friendship is dynamic. You want to help the other person or persons to grow. And I think that for me was the greatest experience in my relationship with Jean, and I imagine with many others, that through his friendship I was personally able to grow to in my political side, but also in my human ability to view the world and so on. So I think that I have no more words to say, but I'm sure that Jean really deserves this prize, and I think that it's really important that the ECPR has decided to grant him this prize, because there's such a strong link between this institution and Jean that it was inevitable that there should be this prize.
Thank you. So
I don't want any suggestion to be made about what I may have done or not done to have the effect of reducing the role that the study of political scientists who have had the nerve or the courage to handle political science in terms of the subject of their own work has been successful. To this extent, I want to thank and to congratulate Maurizio for what he has said today, and I share entirely what he said.
thank you. And now Ian is going to say a few words.
Okay, well, I think Jean has been unusually self-deprecating about his role in all this. My own personal experience was coming from Strathclyde to the ethics department in 1966, and I had come back from America to Britain in the early 60s and found the world of political science narrow, insular, parochial. I mean, it was a big step to speak in another department and go on a visit to another university inside Britain, let alone anywhere else. And insofar as there were foreign influences, it was from the United States, which of course was extremely important, but a bit narrow. So when I moved to Essex from Strathclyde, in some ways the world, or at least the European world, opened up. And I think one forgets the two very important books that Jean wrote in the 60s, one of which drew together all the quantitative work really done on elections and voting in Britain, a very influential book published in Penguin, and then the comparative government tome, which kind of, at least for me, and I think for many others, revolutionised the study of comparative politics, because it wasn't talking about individual countries one by one. It took all 149 countries in the world at that time, each as a unit, and then talked about them in general, made generalizations, and drew on the little amount of data that was available at that time to provide a firm foundation for some of the generalizations. So I think one underestimates the impact that these books have. And then Jean had a revival of popularity in the 1980s when there was a movement in political science called New Institutionalism. All the people who started off doing quantitative work suddenly looked around and realized there were institutions to worry about. Jean had been working on them all the time and became quite a central figure around about 1990. So I think that is one aspect of his work. But I think, of course, the institution building, both at Essex, for he smashed all conventions, really. In France, he went to Brazil instead of staying at Sciences Po to do his PhD or anything, and went out of the normal career ladder. But then he smashed the British conventions by actually suggesting departments got together and did joint work, and that you might actually expand to Europe. When I made a preliminary visit to Colchester in 1965 and went to Jean's house for dinner and so on, talk of Rudolf Wildenmann in Germany and Steinrocken in Norway, and all these names from the continent, which seemed like very distant shores at that time. And of course, you were also very unconventional, Jean, building up the ethics department and in backing the summer school project, which eventually became one of the foundations of the ECPR. Also working tirelessly to bring people together in a European consortium for political research, unheard of at times when practically nobody had visited departments in other countries and one didn't know what was going on. And you soldiered on through various difficulties in 1969 and 70, I gather. 1970 was the official foundation of the ECPR, but 1969 was the year when Jean brought 6 European heads of department or directors together to talk about the idea of a European consortium. They couldn't agree, so it all broke up, but he then managed to persuade the Ford Foundation. Was it the Ford Foundation or the Rockefeller? I can't remember. tobacco money, which was channeled through him and which persuaded the other people to join in at the meeting of 1970. And then the political science world was totally transformed from the 60s to the 70s. I mean, suddenly you had meetings all over Europe. You had a directory of political scientists with details, addresses, telephone numbers, and interests. I know this because Judith Budge did the directory. Jean hired her to do it. And, you know, so the European world in 5 years of European world of political science was totally transformed. Regular meetings, contacts, the summer school bringing the younger generation of Europeans together. You know, it was another world. We've talked about the institutional aspects of the ECPR, but I just wanted to mention, since I have a personal interest in it, all the things that it nurtured in its bosom, so to speak, and made possible, not necessarily official projects of the ECPR, and in many ways it was a strength, they were autonomous initiatives, but they couldn't have happened without the ECPR, without the network of political scientists across the continent, the various institutions, and so on. So I just wanted to mention, coincidentally, the Manifesto Research Group, which started off because my colleague David Robertson at Essex and myself wanted to get to the wonderful city of Florence for the ECPR joint session of 1979, and we thought of a convenient reason to do that, which was to do what David had already done with British manifestos, that is, quantify them by counting the sentences into coding categories, which enabled you to trace the ideological path of parties across time, and as it turned out, also across country. So we started off with a workshop at the ECPR joint sessions, and we were able to contact people across 20 countries because we had their details and we could get in touch with them, brought them together, and in the 80s lived hand to mouth, but very much within the ECPR framework with occasional grants, and meeting in various delectable Italian cities owing to the efforts of our Italian colleagues to get municipal cultural funds, which held the group together. It then transmigrated to a number of independent research groups, all within the aegis of the ECPR in the 1990s, and then to the Wissenschaftszentrum in Berlin from 2010 with the help of a fabulous grant from the German Research Foundation, but which would never have been obtained if we hadn't had the framework and the support of the ECPR to do this. So what I wanted to say is thank you, Jean, for you've been very self-deprecating, but you were the human dynamo at the centre of all this, particularly in the early years, who brought it together and made not just the Manifesto Research Group, but so many research groups, programs and projects possible across Europe.
Thank you. That's really nice case study. Ivor, you wanted to say something.
Well, I think both Maurizio and Ian have expressed probably better terms than I can what I had anyway intended to say. but I do want to just add a little bit of colour, if I might, to their remarks in order to reinforce the messages that they are sending. And I want to start by saying something about what it meant to a young, ambitious political science academic to be in a department led by Jean and to start one's career just at the moment that the ECPR was founded. Now, I was a junior research fellow at Nuffield College, Oxford, which was regarded as one of the kind of hubs of British political science, but had a very traditional conception. And it was traditional in two senses. One is that its focus was very much on the United Kingdom, and to the extent that there were political scientists there who looked at other countries, they would only look at that one other country. So there were fellows of the college and PhD students who were interested in France, but they were only interested in France. It didn't occur to them to make any kind of comparison between France and the United Kingdom. Secondly, their approach to the study of politics was also very traditional, not only case study, but very much narrative, descriptive. And I, along with a small number of other PhD students, and no doubt both at Oxford and elsewhere, we were really energised. And I very much hoped that I would get the Essex job because it was already clear that this was the most innovative and exciting department of political science at the time. It was young, it was new, it was pioneering. That's where I wanted to go. I didn't know whether I would be appointed. There was a vacancy in comparative politics. I didn't really regard myself at the time as a comparative political scientist. My interest was very much in electoral behaviour and parties. But I mugged up on comparative politics for the purposes of the interview. And there were two books that I read. There was a new textbook in comparative politics by Sami Finer. I think it was called Comparative Government, and it consisted of Section 1, Britain, Section 2, the United States, Section 3, France, and so on. And then there was this other book by Jean Blondel, whose reputation I already knew and very much admired because voters, parties and leaders, as Ian has mentioned, really made an impact at the time. It was a new way of looking at politics. And as Ian has said, this looked at 149 countries. I'd never read anything like this before. Anyway, I was asked the critical question at this interview by a member of the appointments committee as to which I thought was the preferable, or how did I compare them, and I hedged my bets. This was a mistake. This was a mistake. So I was appointed. It was a mistake in this sense that I was appointed to the department, but I was kept out of comparative politics for about 5 years. But I came to recognise that this was the new politics. I will always be grateful to Jean, as will others of my generation, because Jean was one of a very small number of professors, I would say, in any department, who really cared about the progress of young academics and who really pushed them and who didn't have any personal agenda in doing this at all. But what he wanted was to encourage all of those young academics, young political scientists who were doing interesting things or wanted to do interesting things, and he gave them the means to do it. He encouraged them, and believe you me, this would not be true in a very large number of departments at that time. It may well be different now. Now, in the early 1970s, a British political scientist had almost no knowledge of what political science was in any other country, with the possible exception of the United States. the only two European political scientists that they had heard of or read would be Duverger and Sartori. And I doubt if there were any others. And the difference that the establishment of the ECPR made was that the mindset, the horizons of certainly a younger generation of political scientists in the United Kingdom were, as Ian has said, transformed within, I think 5 years is cutting it a bit short, but I would say certainly within 10 years. And this was partly because of the summer school, which was a wonderful networking opportunity for younger political scientists, but most of all because of the workshops. In the workshops, for the first time, you would meet others with a similar research interest. You would never have heard of them before or read them before. They came together in the workshops, and the workshops provided usually a very constructive, informal environment in which typically relatively young academics could try out their wings could learn to fly without being feeling that they were under constant scrutiny or criticism. I think it was a very important innovation, a very important institution. Now, if you want a measure of Jean's achievement, ask yourself the question, is there the equivalent of the ECPR in sociology, or economics, or anthropology, or any of the other social sciences? There are European associations within these disciplines, but there is nothing in the other social sciences to compare with the ECPR in the impact that it has had on the organisation and also the culture of the discipline. It Europeanised political science in the way that sociology and economics and so on, in my view, have not been Europeanised. Just one other point I would like to make. It's very easy to take for granted the establishment of an institution. Running an institution, maintaining it, is relatively straightforward and easy compared with actually building an institution. Building an institution from scratch is incredibly difficult. It is a real achievement. I had one or two glimpses of what was involved because I arrived at the department in 1971. Ian will know a little bit more than I do, but I do know that it was very difficult. Think of a heavy steamroller and think of having to get it to move. Once it moves, it goes on moving. But giving it the initial shove is really very difficult. Jean had to persuade some of the big names in political science in other countries to agree to bring their departments into the ECPR, and that was not easy. These were big beasts in the jungle, and here was Jean, who I think they regarded as a little bit of an interloper, trying to persuade them to get together. And Jean used all of his formidable charm to actually bring these big names together, and I really can't overestimate just how just what an achievement that was. Now, Ian said within 5 years all of these departments joined the ECPR. That's true up to a point. The leading departments, most of the leading departments in most of the European countries did join within about 10 years, but that still left a long tail of smaller departments, as well as some countries that were slower in appreciating these than others, France being a really particular example. And the fact that the ECPR was managed to attract these other smaller, less fashionable departments in countries that were less outward looking than say the Scandinavian countries and Germany is a tribute to the initial success of the ECPR, and that wouldn't have happened if the ECPR hadn't got off to such a good start. But like Ian, I'm personally enormously grateful to Jean, who had a major impact on my own life as a political scientist. But I think I and Ian can fairly represent the gratitude of a whole generation of political scientists, and it's important that this story is told so that those who are now in the profession understand what a significant achievement it was to establish the ECPR all those years ago. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was really so kind of you. Can I just add something after this? And because I blamed myself a bit, perhaps too much, for being concerned about well-established leaders of well-known countries, I decided to try and do something in Africa.
About 12 African presidents, because he went for the president in the end. That's the system that is most popular in the world. So we go for the Republican presidents now. And he wants to broaden it. He did that thing on Japan that was mentioned earlier about culture. It was more about cultural studies in a number of Asian countries with Takashi.
Yeah, Takashi was involved when he came in.
And then he wanted to turn his mind to Africa. He did one on Latin America as well. So he's gone further. He wants to go further. He wants ECPR worldwide.
Thank you. We have a little bit more time before we're all going to have a bite of lunch, but there'll be a time for any other comments or observations people might want to make.
But only some elements. I met Jean, I think it was 40 years ago in a meeting of the ECPR in Florence in 1918.
Yes,
in 1878. And I was also a member of the summer school of comparative politics with Dalder in Florence, with Dalder and Peter Mayer and your colleagues from Florence also, Bartolini. And we have had some discussion about the difficulties of the CPR to have universities, member of the institution of the CPR in France at the beginning, in the 80s or 90s also. So when I was director of one of the Institute of Political Studies in Lille, and Jean was many times visiting professor in this institute, and we have had some discussion, and we discussed about also the politics in France, and he understood very well the beginning of the Fifth Republic. He published a book, I think it was at the end of the 60s, or at the beginning of the 70s, a book about politics in France. And the analysis of Jean was, I think, very, very important, because he understood very well the beginning of the Fifth Republic in France, and the evolution of the institution from the first year of the Fifth Republic, with a sort of situation of necessity, the necessity of compromise between, because there was no majority, political majority in the assembly, and it was necessary to have a discussion between the parliamentary groups. And he said also that the real beginning of the First Republic was not in 58, but in 62, when the president was elected by the people, by universal suffrage.
Now, we have a few minutes before we all go for lunch. And David, did you want to say?
I can say just a couple of things which I guess reinforce and echo what's been said earlier on. I mean, Maurizio, having talked about geography, you didn't mention Africa, and I was going to comment in a way
forgot at the end.
where myself, and I'm looking at Dominique, came in right at the end, but Jean has already said that. What strikes me is just this. I mean, you all know it because you've known him and worked with him for such a long time, and that's why we're here in the ECPR. But this kind of capacity for incredible hard work, as Ivor said. Now we take for granted departments, institutions, foundations, etc., but they had to be constructed, and they are constructed recently with massive amounts of hard work. My own department in Birkbeck just celebrated 50 years. People that Jean sparred with, like Ivor Crewe, or one of the previous recipients of the prize, John Lewandowski, etc. But I really got to know Jean very recently because of the Africa project that you've mentioned. And I just posed the question, how many people in their mid-80s would take up a project which simply extends their lifelong work, saying people are people, politics are politics, and we need to look at how politics works in a continent, which is effectively what that book did. So not only that, but John, until a few months ago, was effectively having seminars with myself and a couple of other very young scholars, coming up with new ideas, arguing, not least about France, which I think is one of the things that I profoundly disagree with John about, but we also disagreed over Africa. And this point that Maurizio, Ivor, and the rest of you have highlighted, that friendship is not based on agreement. It's based on a shared interest in ideas and a commitment to some kind of comparative objectivity. So, I just feel, to echo again Maurizio's word, what for me has been important actually is friendship and the development of ideas through friendship, but being mindful that, friendships, ideas, publications, departments rest upon people's hard work over very long periods of time. And it seems to me that as we're in the ECPR, that is what the ECPR is about. It's the reflection of individuals' work in the past, which enables students now, including the PhD students that you've referred to, John, to work. So for that, I'm very, very thankful, and I hope we continue to have arguments and disagreements for many years to come. And John will act as an inspiration to everyone as we go into our 70s and 80s to keep working.
Thank you.